Welcome to Mega Stadiums. Today we're heading to Wareside, to the Stadium of Light, one of the 8 largest grounds in England, built on the bones of a coal mine. This season, it roared back to life, packed to nearly 47,000 every week as Sunderland returned to the Premier League. But from day one, it was designed to grow far bigger, to 63,000 seats, a dream mothballed for years, and now suddenly alive again, just as the club fights its own city council over the land it needs to build it. This is the story of a stadium built on ambition and coal dust. Let's get started. To understand why a club would build a 49,000-seat stadium and quietly design it to hold far more, you first have to understand that Sunderland are not and never have been an ordinary football club. They were founded in 1879, one of the grand old institutions of the English game. 6 times champions of England, the last of those titles won in 1936, winners of the FA Cup in 1937, and again in 1973. This is a club whose history dwarfs almost anything its modern league position would suggest. And that matters, because when you carry that much history, a large stadium doesn't feel like ambition. It feels like a birthright. For 99 years, that history was housed at Roker Park. Sunderland moved in during 1898 and stayed until 1997, the ground taking its name from the nearby Roker Pier and its lighthouse. Roker Park grew across the decades into one of English football's true cathedrals. The Roker Roar was one of the most feared atmospheres in the country, a wall of noise off those great banked terraces. In 1966 was chosen as a venue for the World Cup. For most of a century, this was one of the loudest, most storied grounds in England. But by the 1990s, that century was catching up with it. In the wake of the Hillsborough disaster, Roker Park, hemmed in tight on a constrained residential site, simply could not answer. Its capacity had already fallen to around 22,500. There was no room to expand, and converting the old standing terraces to seats would have been prohibitively expensive for a ground that had nowhere left to grow. A new home wasn't one option among many. It was the only path forward. Roker Park held its final match in May 1997, a 3-0 win over Everton. The ground was demolished and the land was turned over to housing, a small irony worth holding onto, given where this story is heading. What Sunderland did next was, for the time, genuinely audacious. In May 1996, they broke ground on the former site of the Monk Wearmouth Colliery, a closed coal mine on the north bank of the River Wear, and in barely over a year, they built a stadium. It opened on the 30th of July 1997, and when it did, it was the largest new football ground built in England since the Second World War. Think about that. This was a club that had spent recent seasons in the second tier, putting up the boldest new stadium in post-war English football for a cost of around £24 million. It was opened by Prince Andrew, with a friendly against Ajax. From the very beginning, this was a statement of intent that ran well ahead of the club's league position. And then there is the name, the Stadium of Light. It is not a marketing slogan, it is a memorial. The light honours the coal miners of Wareside, and specifically the light of the Davy lamps they carried down into the dark. A giant Davy lamp monument stands outside the ground to this day, a permanent tribute to the Monk Wearmouth Colliery and the men who worked it, some of whom are honoured in the very foundations. This is the identity of the place, a modern arena rooted unmistakably in the region's industrial past. As one writer beautifully put it, it is a cathedral of football in a city famously without one. Crucially for the rest of this story, the stadium was built to grow. Its modular architecture was designed from the outset to be extended, and Sunderland wasted no time proving it. The ground opened at around 42,000. Then, in 2000, the North Stand was extended at a further cost of roughly £7 million, lifting capacity to just under 49,000. The expansion concept had worked exactly as intended, and in doing so it pointed to just how much further the stadium could one day go. Today, the Stadium of Light is among England's 8 largest grounds. It's double-tiered on 2 sides and single-tiered on the other 2. It has hosted concerts for crowds as large as 60,000. Including Ed Sheeran in 2022, and it carries the modern essentials: undersoil heating, a first-class pitch. Since the summer of 2024, under owner Louis-Dreyfus, the club has poured real investment into modernising the matchday experience. Hospitality, fan zones, concourses, a shift the club itself has described as dramatic. But it's worth being precise here, because it matters for what comes next. Those upgrades were about modernisation, not about adding a single seat. Here is where the ambition that built this place comes back into focus. Because from the very beginning, the Stadium of Light was designed with the scope to grow to a potential 63,000 seats by extending the upper tier around the full bowl, most obviously by adding a second tier to the south stand and continuing the deck around from there. To keep that possibility alive, the buffer land around the stadium was deliberately safeguarded, kept clear precisely so that a future expansion would always be physically possible. That foresight is credited largely to former chairman Sir Bob Murray, the man who oversaw the move from Roker Park and who protected that surrounding space for exactly this eventuality. Remember his name, he will matter again before this story is over. For a long time though, the dream didn't just stall, it collapsed under the weight of what happened on the pitch. Successive relegations sent Sunderland tumbling, and from 2018, the club spent 4 full seasons in League One. Even in the third tier, Sunderland routinely posted the highest attendances in the division. In the promotion-winning campaign, they carried something like 35,000 season ticket holders, more than plenty of Premier League clubs could manage. The stadium was, on paper, far too big for the football being played in it. Then came the revival, promotion back to the Premier League, sealed through the Championship playoffs, and a strong first season back. A 7th place finish, an average attendance of around 46,800, effectively a sellout every single week. And just like that, a stadium that had looked oversized for the better part of a decade suddenly looked once again like it might be too small. The 63,000 dream, frozen since the early 2000s, was alive for the first time in a generation. But the house style on this channel is honesty. So let me be clear about exactly where things stand. The club's own recent position is that a full capacity increase is unlikely for now. And, as we said, the 2024 onward works were modernization, not expansion. And yet, in the same breath, the club has submitted a pre-application notification for the redevelopment and extension of the South Stand. The clearest signal yet that the expansion option is not being quietly buried, but actively kept on the table. So, the honest framing is this. The 63,000 is not a confirmed project, and there is no shovel in the ground, but nor is it dead. It is being protected and quietly advanced, waiting patiently for the club to re-establish itself in the top flight. And it's important to say plainly, any 63,000 figure you see is the stadium's designed potential, not a build that is underway. Which brings us to the reason this is a story worth telling right now. Because while the club was quietly protecting that dream, something arrived that threatened to kill it outright. Sunderland City Council has been driving a major regeneration of the land along the River Wear called Riverside Sunderland, and its single largest element is a development known as Sheepfolds, a plan for roughly 1,000 homes across around 79 acres of brownfield land. The problem was the detail. The original proposals included building up to 600 homes on land close to the stadium, and some of that land was the very buffer space the club needs if it is ever to expand. In other words, the city's own regeneration was, in its first form, poised to build houses on the future of the Stadium of Light. The club did not stay quiet. In 2025, owner Louis-Dreyfus lodged a formal objection, warning that the original plans could have, in his words, catastrophic operational consequences for the club, and most importantly, risked landlocking the stadium. The council listened, the plans were amended, the number of homes was cut from up to 600 down to around 456. The plot nearest the stadium was reclassified as commercial only, creating a reinforced buffer between the housing and the ground. According to the council's own documentation, the club's plans for investment in and extension of the South Stand have now been discussed and fully integrated into the revised scheme, with the distances deemed sufficient to accommodate a future expansion. Louis-Dreyfus has said that safeguarding the stadium's long-term future was the club's priority from the outset, and welcomed the revised balance between the city's regeneration and the club's ambitions. But notice what has and hasn't actually happened here. The land fight, the immediate threat of being landlocked, has for now been won. The door has been held open. What has not happened is the expansion itself. That still depends entirely on Sunderland establishing themselves in the Premier League, generating the revenue and choosing to commit. The battle over the land was real, and it mattered, and the club came out of it in a stronger position. But the build remains a future decision, not a present certainty. And there it rests. The Stadium of Light was built on pure boldness. designed to grow to 63,000, a dream that survived 4 years in the 3rd division and came roaring back with promotion. When the city threatened to wall it in, the club fought to keep the door open and won. The miners' light still burns over Wearside. Whether it shines over 63,000 seats now depends only on whether Sunderland can stay in the Premier League long enough to build it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching. See you next week.